And first of all, is everyone seeing the right presentation, or do you see presenters mode?
We see presenters mode.
About now?
Now we see the right presentation.
The right presentation. Okay. So let me welcome everybody. And first of all, thank you to Cambridge Zero, Antonietta, and Harriet Hannibal also for inviting us to submit this interesting panel. We've had a course, as already mentioned in our invitation to you all, at the University College Freiburg with the title that you already know as well. And all of us participating today here are either me, the instructor, Fabricio Rodríguez, and then all of us are students, with the exception of also Franziska Franke, who is an alumna of University College Freiburg, now working on issues related to climate justice. And we're pleased to start with this. It will be a series of snapshots of what we have learned together around this issue and wanted to share with you. And I will hand over directly to Emre, who's going to be moderating the rest of the session. Emre, can I give you the word?
Yes, thank you, Fabricio, for the warm-up. And I would like to also welcome all the panelists and participants that are here with us today. And thank each and every one of you for sparing the valuable time and energy of yours to be here today. We will be having various short presentations on topics that are interrelated with low carbon transitions and environmental justice. Each presentation will take 5 minutes, and after each presentation, we will continue on to the next presenter right away. So I would advise for our participants to write down any questions that they might have and ask them in the discussion part, which will take place in the second half of our panel. So as you can see, the first presentation is going to be from Elena Kolb, and then Josephine Schwenke about city councils, and Ludwig Steinmetz from about energy poverty, and Ida Tiefenbach will be the last presentation. And after that, we will have a discussion round from 3:30 to 3:50, moderated by Fabricio, and then a wrap up and a final comment by Franziska Franke. But before jumping into the first presentation, which will be held by the senior LAS student Elena Kolb, I would like to ask all of the participants to type in the chat where they are tuning in from, which I think Antonita already did, but maybe she's tuning in from somewhere around the world as well. And how familiar are you with environmental justice? How familiar are you with the environmental justice question? I'm going to post a link right now in the chat, and you can answer that through that link. And where are you tuning in from? You can just type it in the chat of Zoom right away. So without further ado, I would like to already get started with the first presentation, which will be from Elena Kolb. And the stage is yours, Elena.
Okay, so we don't wait for the answers, or should I start right away?
Yeah, maybe we can wait just a second for the answers, so that
okay.
Right away. Thank you for reminding me. Maybe that's good. Joining from London, UK. Welcome, James, and Cambridge. And also, meanwhile, I will be checking the link where I can see your answers. A bit. There are people with us who are a little bit familiar with environmental justice, very familiar with it, and a little. So it's a mixed crowd, we can say. And yeah, by the way, I would also like to say that I'm tuning in. I can also share, I guess, from Freiburg, where Albert Ludwigs University and UCF is stationed at. So now we can start with the presentation, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Emre, and thank you Fabricio, for the welcome, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today. My name is Elena Kolb, and in my paper that I wrote for the course that we are presenting today, I address global plastic waste management, and I will try to wrap up my findings for you now within some minutes. We live on a plastic planet. Global virgin plastic production still accelerates without an adequate solution for its management. Fossil fuel-based plastic waste floats in our surrounding from the poles to the deep ocean basins. It pollutes our environment, kills marine life, and endangers human health. Therefore, it is in the international community's interest to understand how global plastic waste management can be improved. An environmental justice perspective helped me in my paper detect that the global plastic waste management system is full of loopholes and mistakes. Unexpected interruptions in the global plastic waste management cause heavy negative environmental and social impacts. As an example, I examined the Chinese waste import ban in my paper. When China introduced its waste import ban in 2017, the international community was not really prepared. On the small picture in the right corner of my slide, which you can see here, you can see illustrated that before the Chinese waste import ban, China imported large proportions of all plastic waste produced internationally. But because of the growing Chinese middle classes, the domestic consumption and waste production had increased. Waste production reduced the demand for imported plastic waste materials from other countries. And additionally, the year-long waste import had caused serious pollution of air, water, and land. China, being one of the biggest economies in the world today, now desired a more sustainable development. The Chinese waste import ban led to changes in global economic hierarchies. Though waste-producing countries like Germany, Japan, or the US continue to excluding their waste and thereby their environmental burdens, other countries like Malaysia, for example, started a huge import. Thereby, in these new waste importing countries like Malaysia, for example, the Chinese waste import ban caused heavy social and environmental impacts. Poisoning materials were detected in the soil and in the air. From an environmental justice perspective, it is in the international community's interest to prevent more unexpected interruptions in the global waste management, like the Chinese waste ban, because it caused such heavy negative environmental and social impacts. One day, the middle classes in Malaysia might also produce more domestic plastic waste. The country might then not rely on cheap plastic waste imports anymore. More waste import bans might be introduced, which might again interrupt the global plastic waste management. In my paper, I therefore propose the introduction of a circular economy for global plastic waste management, improving international recycling capacities and simplifying plastic products. On the one side, this could acknowledge the economic interests that, in my example, Malaysia has with the import of plastic waste. But most importantly, a circular global plastic waste management can also prevent environmental pollution and social injustices. Finally, acknowledging the environmental justice perspective in global plastic waste management and the introduction of a circular economy for plastic waste management would contribute to a low carbon transition, because the circular economy can save tons of resources, and less processing of virgin fossil fuels will also minimize global CO2 emissions. And that was it already from my side. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward for questions that you might pose later. And I'm handing over to Emre, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Elena. That was for your swift presentation. And there have been already some newcomers. So I will just repeat what we have said in the beginning. If the newcomers can share where they're tuning in from in the world, in the chat, we'd be very grateful. And there's also the link, which I will post again, where you can just type in how familiar you are with environmental justice with just a few words. Here's the link again. And yeah, we will be going into the next presentation right away from Josefina Schwenke, and stage is yours.
Yes, so hi, I'm Josephine. I wrote in my paper about Citizen Council for Climate in France. So climate change and humans' response to it is a multi-dimensional and complex issue, as we probably all know. It is not purely a technological transition towards renewable energies, but rather incorporates social economical dimensions which touch upon the social equity among people. And thus, if the impacts of climate policies are not well managed, the low carbon transition may cause loss and hardship, especially in those communities that today rely on carbon intensive activities such as fossil fuel extraction or individual automobile-based transportation, for example. So further, the example of the Yellow Vest movement in France, for example, show that climate policies like the rise of carbon taxes might result in conflict and protest when citizens perceive that policies have been made without incorporating their needs and perspectives. So the question basically is, how can effective and ecological policies be implemented that also positively impact social equity among people and are publicly accepted? And empirical studies in Europe, for example, might show that a successful development of new policies and industries in regions usually builds on inherited regional capabilities, such as existing local knowledge, skills, and institutions. So hence what some national or regional governments did to overcome a political stalemate and to reach a more inclusive development of policies is the introduction of citizen councils. In these citizen councils, citizens across multiple demographic criteria such as age, gender, socioeconomic background, education, and regions are randomly selected. Usually, these citizen councils have a clear agenda. For example, in France, the goal was to propose policies which can reduce France's emissions by 40%. And further, citizens meet several times for a few days over the course of at least half a year. And during these sessions, a process of so-called knowledge co-production takes place. Knowledge co-production can be defined as iterative and collaborative process involving diverse types of expertise, knowledge, and actors to produce content-specific knowledge and pathways towards a sustainable future. And the results of these citizen councils have often been quite liberal and progressive. And the Citizen Council in France, for example, have proposed climate policies that were far more ambitious than the ones of the French government. They, for example, decided the prohibition of new construction of airports. However, several questions regarding the effectiveness and inclusiveness of citizen councils still remain. And some of these questions are: how much influence do experts have in deliberative processes? How transparent is the whole process of the citizen council? What are the criteria to choose experts and facilitators for citizen councils, and how neutral can and should they be? How large should the scope of task for the citizens should be? How binding is the outcome of such citizen council for future governmental decisions? Which support mechanism for participants need to be implemented so that everyone can actually participate at a citizen council? And this can, for example, include childcare fees that people might need to pay when taking part in these citizen council processes. And are power dynamics between citizens being taken into account? So there, for example, a training of deliberative methods such as listening, debating, and elaborating arguments, as well as a good moderation of debates, can be important. Finally, to conclude, even though questions remain open regarding citizen councils, they can be a promising democratic tool to give diverse citizens the space to express their perspectives, and additionally to offer politicians a better reflection of what citizens want and demand. Yes, that was from my side.
Well, thank you, Josefina, for this beautiful presentation. And we will now directly go to our next presentation without losing any time. I hope everyone is taking notes of their questions. We are waiting, very excited. We are very excited to just have a fruitful discussion later on. So stage is yours, Ludwig.
Thank you, Emre. And hello from my side. As you already said, my name is Ludwig. And yeah, I have more of a technical background in energy engineering. So participating in this course, about environmental justice is very interdisciplinary for me. Because as an engineer, I was more educated in solving technical problems and developing more the sustainable systems and solutions to decarbonize our energy system. And just looking from that point of view on challenges like the low carbon transition can sometimes be quite simple, because we might have the view that our technical solutions just have to be put in place by politics. But looking through the environmental justice perspective, we can see that there are actually more problems coming, which are not necessarily be solvable with just our approach. And yeah, I would like to give an example for that. It is probably clear that a low carbon transition comes with a cost, because if we want to have carbon neutral technologies, they must fit in our energy system and therefore become profitable. So a very common policy instrument for that is putting taxes on carbon emissions to make fossil fuels, for example, more expensive, but so that renewable energies can get a higher penetration in our energy system. And we will know that in the future we need definitely very high prices on carbon. And of course, the customer or the consumer in the end has to pay these. So why can this lead to problems? So consequence is that consumers that do not have access to renewable energies are paying higher and higher prices for their energy, which is basically required for many human needs. So which people are affected by this? These are, for example, people that anyway have a lower income, or people living in bad housing with a very high energy consumption, or people living in areas with a low potential for clean energy. So you can see here that we have many injustices about energy consumption and the energy sources we have. There are already millions of people in Europe suffering from energy poverty, which can be measured in many ways. For example, being able not to keep a home adequately warm in winters can be one measure to see if people are energy poor or not. So how to deal with this energy poverty, and whose task is it in the end to fight energy poverty in the future? It could be, rationally thinking, a task of social policy to fight energy poverty. So, but this would in the end act as a counterpart to energy policy. And this is now where the environmental justice perspective becomes interesting, because I claim that through the environmental justice perspective, it allows us to tackle both problems together and finding synergetic effects rather than being counterparts. Here, the social politics and energy politics. And yeah, designing the low carbon transition through this environmental justice perspective might help us also as engineers to recognize and define problems like energy poverty earlier, and then we can collectively find a pathway to green and just energy systems. And I think interdisciplinarity is very crucial here. That is my main finding I learned from the environmental justice course. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, and it's a very interesting topic. Which perspective is helping one another, and which perspective is actually acting as a counter to the environmental justice perspective and the energy poverty that is surrounding the world. And now we're going to have our last presentation from Anne Tiefenbach. Stage is yours.
Thanks, Emre. Okay, I'll just go over here.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. We're now gonna fly from Europe to South America and look at a different case of that of Yasunizing. Now, you guys might ask yourself, what does that mean to Yasunize? Well, the term or concept arose from the so-called Yasunidos social movement, which demanded to leave the oil in the ground. And I'll tell you a bit more about the social movement in a second. But first of all, it's important to know or understand that it was really important or as pioneer among the many so-called environmental justice movements across the world. And I don't know if it's become clear, but like environmental justice is made up of diverse local movements that are, however, becoming more and more globally connected. And yeah, exactly. So what exactly is the Yasunido social movement? The conflict began because of the planned oil drilling within the Yasuni National Park in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And what is important to know is that this place is highly biologically and culturally diverse, fragile and unique. So it was in fact found to be the most biodiverse place on Earth. And also it's home to indigenous tribes that live there in voluntary isolation and so-called protected intangible zones. And it is within this very fragile area that oil drilling was to be taken place. And the indigenous population living there resisted this and launched a novel proposal to the Ecuadorian government to leave the oil in the ground, as I already said, thereby rejecting the so-called neo-extractivist development model that relies on intensive oil extraction in many Southern American countries, that is typically presented as a very helpful or necessary motor for national development and progress. And so this movement opposes this idea and instead fights for post-extractivist economies. And what was so astonishing or even revolutionary about the proposal was that it was successful in 2007, as the president Rafael Correa decided to launch the proposal, wanting to finance it via compensatory costs of the international community, so that richer countries such as Germany pay for the benefits of non-extracting, so as they can contribute to the mitigation of climate change and also setting Ecuador on a path towards non-oil dependent economies. So that was really a crucial moment. But then in 2013, the proposal was then abandoned again by the Correa administration, likely because of pressure of the oil lobby and also a lacking willingness of richer countries to pay the compensatory costs, which then led Correa to argue again that oil extraction is necessary for the development of Ecuador. And by then, however, the social movement had already grown, and this caused a major outcry, which then led to the birth of the bigger Yasunidos social movement that arose from this indigenous idea to a more bigger interdisciplinary, even international movement that is involving diverse actors like academics, activists, urban young from the cities, and so on and so forth. So thereby we can say that it is part of the bigger environmental justice movement, or maybe even one of the first environmental justice movements. And the movement itself claims to be a diverse and inclusive collective that is united in the defense of life. And hereby important to know or maybe understand this like reverse in gaze is that life isn't just understood as human life, but actually also including non-human life, nature. Yeah, and the main practical of the Yasunido social movement was to hold a national referendum on the question of whether or not to stop oil drilling in the Yasunidos and the Yasuni. And the social movement did in fact collect enough signatures, but nevertheless didn't manage to implement the national referendum because of several issues of repression and political persecution that led basically claimed that they didn't have enough signatures, and there was a lot of problems and also shady businesses in this that I can't go into detail right now, but if you want, I can tell you more later. But what is maybe interesting for us rather to see is that on the one hand, the case sadly shows how difficult it is to implement radical transformative ideas within the context of a still very neoliberal economic and social system that still relies on oil extraction despite the urgent need to fight climate change. And on the other hand, the movement was also a very powerful moment where a lot of people across diverse classes of society and like sections of society joined together and yeah, built on the idea, and this is, I just want to mention this word really shortly, the idea of also of the good life of buen vivir. Now I'll come to an end in a second. That is very present in the Ecuadorian context, but South America in general. The concept that opposes the sort of capitalist idea of always living better, but instead thinking of many ideas of living well, so living in harmony with nature, relying on reciprocity and solidarity instead of, for instance, constant improvement and growth, expansionism and competition. So really it implies a deeper questioning of nature-society relations. And this is really an important maybe ideology or theory behind the Yasunido social movement. So what I'm getting at and concluding with is that there is like this conjuncture of the specific Yasunido's case that is situated within the bigger environmental justice movement, which itself is situated within the bigger debate on possible alternative ideas of development or moving past extractivist development forms. So I want to conclude with the quote that is on here. I'll just read it out loud, which is kind of the conclusion from my paper. The combination of environmental justice with Buen Vivir provides a fruitful venture point and space for creative knowledge exchange within the pluriverse of post-development ideas. To be concrete, environmental justice offers a strong framework for the critique of unsustainable neo-extractivist practices and ideas for more socially and environmentally just alternatives. At the same time, the multifaceted concept of Buen Vivir serves as a promising transitional paradigm both for creative utopian visions, as well as create concrete practical demands that may one day truly set Ecuador on a pathway towards a socially just, low carbon future. Yeah, and with that, I think we've ended, and thank you for your attention. I hand the voice over to Emre again.
Thank you, Ayla, for this beautiful presentation, and so inspiring to just hear about how for example, in this case, Yasunido's movement to just come from the indigenous community and then expand into so many different diverse background, people from diverse backgrounds, and just coming all united for the same cause. So with that, now our presentations are over. And I thank each and every one of our presenters, and I will hand the word to Fabricio, who will be moderating the second half, which will be our discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Emre, and thanks a lot, everybody, for all these great presentations. I was really excited to listen to you all both again, to all of you again. I knew from the beginning this would be an interesting course, but now also after you've written papers and worked on these topics, I have to say this was a good idea to just wrap up these learnings. I've learned a lot also from you and with you, and I'm curious to see what others are having in terms of questions. I wanted to quote Emre before going on to the discussion, because I think his work reminds us of the idea that in social science, we need to be aware of what is the scope of what we're dealing with. And so environmental justice, and this was one of, I think, Emre, your recurring questions, is everything a case of environmental justice if we talk about ecology? And so I think in your paper, you wrote exactly what is important, right? Environmental justice provides us with a new platform to shift the terms of the conversation from a purely technical or purely economical approach towards taking into account how the need to change the way we are doing everything today needs to also consider a number of issues that all these presentations talked about. So I don't want to talk more because this is the time for you to raise questions to all the participants. And the idea would be just please write your name in the chat. I will end this presentation for now so we can all see each other. Maybe you can turn on your cameras as you wish. And then I will collect a round of 3 to 4 questions, and then you can say who these are directed. So just hoping technology helps me right now. yeah, we should be in the common floor. So can I ask anybody who would like to raise questions to either raise their hand? You're probably still thinking, have a lot of, there was a tour of the world. Okay, thanks, Antonietta. We know you're there. And I would like to take the chance to thank everybody who has joined. We're happy to see that people have been joining the session. You don't have to ask any questions. There can be also comments, or maybe you're working on a project right now that has a connection to these issues. Let me see. Yes, James, I have a question for Josephine. What do you think are the successful ways to start citizen assemblies? Why don't we just go straight into that, Josephine?
Yeah, sure. So I think before starting a citizen council or citizen assembly, you should really think about the scope. So should it be on a regional level? Should it be on a national level? Then, of course, it is important to think about a specific goal of this citizen council. So as I already said, it is most useful if there is like a clear agenda or a clear goal, what the citizen assembly should think about or should discuss. And then, of course, it's important to find some sort of funding, because like all the people, if it's a citizen council on national level, they all have to come together and be at one place. And people, yeah, as I already had said, they also need some recovering if they have some expenses to go to a specific place. So I think funding is important, and just to think about general criteria. So how do you want to design the citizen council? How do you get data so that you can randomly select citizens? So in France, for example, they had access to like all the national institutions. So they had access to directly randomly contact the citizen or the chosen citizen via phone numbers, I guess. So yeah, I think it's really important to, before calling a citizen council, to really think about the whole design, about the criteria, about the agenda, about the funding, and to probably get in contact with some institutions, either regional or national institutions. And one last point, which then kind of raised a lot of debates and conflicts after the Citizen Convention in France, is to think about what do we actually do then with the outcome of the Citizen Convention. Because in France, Macron kind of promised to unfiltered accept all the policy proposals and to either let it into the parliamentary vote or to referendum. And after the Citizen Convention, he kind of didn't really kept his promise. So he didn't really took all the policy proposals and put it into legislation, but rather, watered them a lot down and just, took a fraction of all of these proposals into actually, legal propositions then.
Thanks a lot, Josephine, for that answer to James' question. I see there's a message right now. Thank you. Seems like the question has been answered. Thank you also, James, for that. And I'm also curious, actually, to those of you who have joined today. I read Max. Max, you're a sustainability manager at a medical device company. And I'm wondering, it's great to have you. Would you share with us like how your interest came about to join this topic? Is there a follow-up question from James?
There's a follow-up. I think there, again, it really depends whether it's on a regional, on a municipal level, or on a national level. I think in the Citizen Convention in France, there were around 100 people, so quite a lot. But of course, it doesn't have, like, if it's kind of a small city of 2,000 inhabitants or 10,000 inhabitants, then probably less are sufficient too. And it also always depends on the funding you have.
Thank you, Josephine. And just, yes, and Max said he's traveling right now, so he can put his camera on or talk. Thank you, Max. And feel free, if you'd like, of course, to write in the chat. Is there any other comments from that you would like to add from the group? What about Divya? Divya, great to have you. Would you like to share with us what motivated you to join us? We're just curious, and I think it's interesting to have an idea of how to connect with people that are working in different fields and regions around these global issues that have local implications. So Max is writing, and I will read it out loud. Yeah, but my interest in environmental justice is around what learnings we can take into both personal lives around campaigning and also how to incorporate it into our corporate strategy for net zero and sustainability. So I understand the corporate strategy would be, in this case, from the perspective of a company that is working in the medical sector, I take it. Any one of you who would like to respond to this? I mean, I must admit, one of the first things that came to my mind in the medical industry is the plastic issue, for example, that I guess this type of companies, without knowing too much detail about your business, would be an issue. So Elena, you might want to say something about that, and Josephine, I have you also. I see you raised your hand. So we still have some minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, so should I start or?
Please, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I would then go back to my presentation a bit maybe, and the aspect of a carbon transition connected to the issue of global circular plastic waste economy. And yeah, I just learned in my research that I did there that there is just a lot of potential in many, like there are many ways how to introduce this international global circular economy for plastic waste management. And yeah, and examples are, for example, are the reduction or the improvement of recycling strategies or simplifying of plastic products, or, for example, data collection, so that we have a better overview of which countries are actually able to recycle plastic products better, and if we don't need new resources to or new fossil fuel, we can save on this aspect a lot of carbon emissions, I guess.
Thank you, Elena, for these reflections. And I have Josephine also on the list. So I'm not sure if you want to add to this question again or go back to the other topic. Feel free.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Max Finney, who wrote to take this interest in environmental justice into campaigning and corporate strategy. And I think especially this democratic tool of citizen convention can at least partially be maybe put into corporate institutions or like global corporations, because I think one big problem is that even though we have, for example, in Germany, we have a democracy, but many companies, they are not democratic. So yeah, many processes and decisions can be made without incorporating the perspectives of the employees or the need of the employees. And I think especially also in terms of climate change and in terms of responsible behavior and ecological behavior, one very important step would be to democratize also companies worldwide, so that they are better controlled by their employees too.
Thank you, Josephine, for adding to that also, to that question. I think it is actually, Max, thank you for this, because I think in our class, one thing that we could, maybe for next kind of term, would be to incorporate also more clearly the role of private companies in different value chains and how corporate strategies can actually contribute to different topics of lower carbon transition. So this is something that I think we can learn from you, and thank you for your comment. But you also asked actually about how we can take these learnings into both personal lives around campaigning. Anyone want to address that question? So how is environmental justice helping you, maybe on a personal level, to deal with these issues, whether work or just everyday life? Anyone would like to say something about that?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Ella.
Just like the most basic learning, or like the most clear one, especially for me, is that or when I first stumbled upon environmental justice, is that like the transition towards low carbon economies and societies entails much more than just a technological change. And I think that's what needs to happen, or like this discussion needs to take place within the global community very urgently, because until today, especially in Germany, like the climate change mitigation measures are addressed purely on a technological level and only seldomly go to the root, or like tackle or address that it's inherently a social and political problem as well, and that maybe we need to first have a change in perspective on a social level. And of course that doesn't take place from one day to another, but I think that's kind of, at least this is what I also can learn from the case of Yasuninos and BMBF, that yeah, we can't just keep up the system that we have, but we have to change the perspective. And environmental justice gives this perspective, because it doesn't say that sustainability is purely building windcrafts, but rather that it's yeah, that it needs to be socially sustainable as well, because yeah, and I guess there's multiple cases that demonstrate the problems with just purely technological solutions.
Thanks a lot, Ayla, for this perspective as well. Then I have Emre and Vanessa who are raising their hands. I'd say we take those two questions, and afterwards I would like to move to Francisca's comment before we approach the 3 p.m. In the UK and 4 p.m. in Germany kind of deadline. Okay, Emre, go ahead, and then Vanessa, please.
I would say, like, this this question also reminds me of the importance of the indigenous communities that are out there, that we learn from, for example, certain NGOs or certain movements that we can relate to with environmental justice, and how we can realize on a personal level that this information, the knowledge that indigenous tribes have about preserving the environment, about creating a sustainable future, living in harmony with the nature, this knowledge is being lost and being eradicated by the policies and by different, let's say, well, different priorities on perspectives that are governing around the world. And when these types of knowledge, when it's gone, and we cannot reach it anymore again. So on a personal level, I think there are very important reminders that we can understand and then share with others and raise the awareness on the issue.
Thanks a lot, Emre, for this really, really important comment as well on the different kinds of knowledges that are kind of not so visible, and depending on where these transitions are being thought about and also made. So Vanessa.
Hello. Thank you. Yes, I'm joining from Freiburg, and I'm Peruvian. I was for many years part of the civil society, and from that experience, for me, environmental justice was more connected to the movements than to the academia. And now I'm trying to make this connection of how environmental justice becomes a theory or a framework or a lens. And I still find it difficult to understand how this transition happens. So I'm trying to figure out how. And it was really useful to hear you. But then as I heard all your, and mostly the Yasuni paper, I guess most of the environmental justice in the academia is giving voices to different groups. But then who do you decide whose voice fits in the environmental justice ideal, and from where? For example, Ecuador or Bolivia are clear examples, no? Once the communities say something, it's environmental justice, but then if the government supports them, it's still environmental justice, but then if the government changes, then it's not environmental justice anymore. And how do you make that clear cut? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Really great questions for us to think about. Anyone wants to address that from the students?
I could address the second question, but if someone wants to go ahead.
Go ahead. I
first.
think let's take 4 minutes. You go 2 minutes, and then I go 2 minutes because I'd like to say something as well on that question. And then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're an expert, so yeah. I also wanted to say that in my presentation, actually, that I'm absolutely not an expert on the case, and also don't want to speak for the movement, just about it. And I think those are like really important ethical questions that are difficult for like me as a, I don't know, German student to address, who has like isn't part of the movement in that sense. But yeah, I think that's kind of the powerful thing about the movement, that it's becoming more interdisciplinary, as you also said, like knowledge is kind of diffusing from the indigenous ideas mainly, but also across different sections of society. That's makes it maybe what it is and makes it so powerful, I think, on a global level. And I think personally that like global connections are important, that maybe also people in Germany can learn from this. But on the other hand, of course, those ethical questions need to be addressed. For example, who gets to have the say? And is it like really indigenous leaders who started the movement who have the say? Or is it in the end the Ecuadorian government who supposedly supports this, like you just said? Yeah, but I passed the voice on to you.
Just wanted to ask Josephine, would you like to comment on this question as well? I would give you the word first.
I just want to say one sentence. I think also the chance to put environmental justice into academia is to more draw patterns, because often in these cases there are like developments which are very similar. For example, if there is a political decision to transition to renewable energies, so the economy is also changing, and asymmetries in power is affecting then suddenly other local communities which weren't affected before. So I think academia can help to kind of unveil the whole power asymmetries in the world, or also within a nation, which cause this environmental injustices.
Thank you, Josephine, and also Ayla for referring to this question. Vanessa, I think it's really important, and it's an ongoing task to think about this in science, to reflect the kind of knowledge that we produce. And at least in our course, that what I think came through the experience of dealing with the literature that is already out there. We engage with literature from people that have written extensively about these issues. And so it's never going to be clear cut. So the first thing is we had to acknowledge that we are engaging with struggles, and some movements self-identify as being part of a struggle for justice. And I think one important thing, at least in my view, is that it kind of holds us accountable as scientists to don't assume that the type of knowledge that we find within the normal everyday life is the right kind of knowledge to understand a number of situations, but rather to go and say what kind of knowledge is being generated in the places where people are making a case for justice. So for example, sometimes the official statistics lead us in the completely wrong way because they are not going to the people and not assessing the problems that are maybe affecting people. We engage with pesticides, for example, in Uruguay, where biomass production is affecting numbers of people with diseases where official figures are not being generated. So communities engage in mapping certain patterns of conflict, but certain patterns of disease as well. Environmental health issues were part of what we looked at. But I think it's not an easy task. It's just becoming sensitive to the idea that it is important to go and engage with these movements. And I think that is a very fruitful tension, I would say. But I think, and I'm sure Francisca is going to be able to say a bit more on this. And I think we've come to the part in which we're going to have a wrapping up comment. And Francisca is also working directly with these concepts, not only in theory, but also in practice. So Francisca, I'll just give you the word and the floor is yours. You have a slide, so shall I use that, or you want to?
I think we can also stay in the setting like this.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not too much on this slide. So yes, thank you for all the points that have been raised and all the issues. I feel like wrapping up now is not the easiest task because we've talked about so many things, but that's also what for me environmental justice kind of does. It helps us to see a lot of social problems that are connected to climate change or the pathways we are taking to tackle climate change. And yes, as Fabricio said, I've not been a student in this class, but I've studied at UCF before, and I'm very thankful that during my studies there, I had the opportunity to engage with environmental justice or climate justice as a concept also in my bachelor thesis. And then I went on to do internships, one of which was at a policy think tank in Berlin. And that gave me the chance to also reflect about how these concepts can really help in practice to shape policies. And I think the point Vanessa raised, or that really is stuck in my mind now, and I'm thinking about it, like where this term environmental justice came from and how it entered academia. And I see a certain danger maybe that now environmental justice becomes sort of an empty term that is just used to describe many things, then without people actually knowing what is behind this idea. I think that's the powerful thing that this term and perspective can give us, that it can open debates if we ask the right questions, and to also think about, well, and then what is just in these issues that come up. So if we take energy poverty, for example, but first of all, maybe environmental justice, this perspective would lead us to think about energy poverty, but then also open the debate, or maybe inspire us to have the debate about, okay, but what would then be a just distribution of energy? So I think we don't stop when we look at charts of how energy is kind of unequally distributed, but that's, I feel like, where the debate should then start. What would be a just distribution, or how do we justly incorporate different perspectives, for example, in the form of a citizen assembly? How do we deal with other forms of knowledge that are not, do not come out of our academic sphere, but indigenous knowledge maybe? So yes, that's what I think this perspective gave me, at least. And I also felt that there was resonance with these ideas in the policy think tank I worked, where I had a chance to present to my colleagues some of the ideas that I dealt with in my bachelor thesis. And yeah, I really felt like talking about these concepts or climate justice, environmental justice in sometimes more abstract terms gives a level of reflection and abstraction to the whole debate that can, on the one hand, help us to evaluate existing pathways that we've chosen, existing policy proposals, but also points to blind spots maybe where we have to look closer and see issues that maybe we've not seen before. And I think now we've almost reached 4 o'clock. So yeah, thank you also to Fabricio for giving us as students the opportunity to speak here, and for all the people who have been listening. And if you want to get in touch, I think our emails will be shared. So if you feel like there's something you want to further discuss or have interesting projects ongoing where we might join, I don't know, we're all young people looking for interesting projects, then please get in contact. And with that, I would hand it over to Fabricio again.
Thanks so much, Francisca, for these closing remarks and also for raising questions for further reflection. I think, of course, an hour is incredibly short time, but I want to thank you all because we walked quite quickly through different corners of the world. And as we promised or suggested in this session, we wanted to say that, you know, let us look at environmental justice as a lens that would help us look at and think about low carbon transitions, which are everywhere, whether it's the Green Deal in Europe, whether it's the bioeconomy, the green economy, whether it's BMBF, and there are competing ideas about how to do this. And it's the Climate Change Festival in Cambridge. We're very, very thankful as well, Antonietta, to be able to discuss a bit of our findings from our course. And yes, Antonietta, I'm reading the chat as I speak. We're invited to look at more details on the website, Climate Change Festival Zero. And I understand Zero Cambridge series, an initiative from Cambridge Zero is a platform that is inviting and connecting communities across the world. So I hope we can keep on having this conversation. And Antonietta, thank you so much. It was great to be with you. And I would say for now, I'll stop recording